thank you so much, Vinny, for being with us today. My name is Eniola Harrison, and I'm a communications consultant and co-founder of Africa Communications Week. And really thrilled to be speaking with you today. And just for those of you who are joining us, thank you for being here. And today we're going to be just discussing with Vinny about his entrepreneurship journey and just learning a bit more about what he does and just discussing some of the macroeconomic trends and in entrepreneurship that we're seeing across the continent, and also, just giving some advice to aspiring entrepreneurs. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a brief introduction to Vinny, and then we'll dive right into the questions. So Vinny is a South African internet entrepreneur. He's the co-founder and CEO of Civic, which is an identity protection and management startup. He was also previously the founder and CEO of Gift, which was acquired by First Data Corporation in 2014, as well as Yola Inc. He is also the co-founder of Silicon Cape, which is an NGO based in South Africa, and with the aim and objective of turning Cape Town into a technology hub. This I can attest to because I visited Silicon Cape. And he's also the co-founder of the investment fund Newton Partners, through which he leads early stage investments. He was selected as an Endeavor entrepreneur in 2006 and a young global leader in 2009 with the World Economic Forum. So Vinny, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Good to be in. I think you said 2006. I'm like, wow, was it that long ago? I'm getting pretty old. Not so young anymore.
Time flies. So basically, okay, so you moved to Silicon Valley in 2008, right, during the financial crisis. Can you share with us a bit about your entrepreneurship journey and how you navigated that move, especially during that tough economic climate?
Sure. And just one quick question. I've got this countdown clock timer on the left-hand side, which just keeps going down 58 seconds. Is it going to cut us off?
I don't think it's going to cut us off. You have a hard stop at in 15 minutes. I don't believe it should. Okay. I hope not.
It says session starts in 45 seconds and counting.
No, it's not. It's not red, at least. So I think if it was red, it would be a problem.
Okay.
Let's fingers crossed.
That's fine. Just double checking. Yeah. So it's been a long journey from the African shores. I grew up in a small town called East London in South Africa, and spent my childhood days there, pretty much almost exclusively. And then I moved to Cape Town for a couple of years. Went to the University of Cape Town in Johannesburg. Worked there in the corporate world for a while, and then just decided I would go off on my own at a very young age, and started my own search engine marketing company back in the days. And what wound up happening back in those days is when you talk about search engine marketing in 2002, 2003, no one knows what you're talking about. It was ancient days. So I had the challenge of convincing people that this is going to be a thing, search engine marketing and being online, etc. I left South Africa for a multitude of reasons. If I had to pin it down to three things, it would be President Zuma taking over in 2007. Then the next thing would be the internet speeds were horrendous. And it was the slowest thing you can imagine. We were using 128K lines back in those days. And the third thing was there was just no power. We were having rolling blackouts all the time. And I was like, I can't live here. I can't do internet. I can't do internet-y stuff here. So I'm going to move to Silicon Valley. So I packed up and I moved to Silicon Valley in 2008. And I was there for about 10 years. I'm in San Diego now, but I spent about 10 years in Silicon Valley building a network, doing some cool stuff, some great investments, etc. Being involved in the cryptocurrency world as well. I just built a very, I would say a very interesting career. Being an investor, an entrepreneur, just a industry sort of thought leader on some levels for certain areas. But I've settled down in San Diego now, and Newtown Partners is in Cape Town, my venture capital firm. We partnered with Imperial Logistics, and we manage a pretty sizable fund for them to do investments across Africa mainly and the rest of the world. We've made some good African investments recently. So I'm very bullish on Africa as a market. I mean, we are making a lot of investments in the logistics space in Africa. Um, and I've invested personally in companies like Flutterwave in Nigeria and a few others. So very much, but I have a global sort of view on things. And people ask me all the time, like, why did you leave, whatever. And my reasons for leaving have largely disappeared. Now I'm not going to go back to Africa because I'm
Okay.
settled. I'm settled here. But I don't advise people to leave Africa right now. I think Africa is like the kind of the final frontier, and there's a lot of opportunity in Africa. I'm investing in Africa. I think there's a lot of scope for growth. It does have its political challenges and fragmentation issues, but there's a lot of opportunity to build some really cool businesses in Africa, and so I don't advise people to leave Africa at all. I think they staying behind now is probably the better option than moving to try and go for greener pastures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a really good segue into our next question, which is what advice would you give to African entrepreneurs thinking about running a startup, especially during uncertain times like COVID right now? I mean, is this the time? So yes, that there is a lot of opportunity for really interesting, I would say, ventures, and we can see a lot of really great things coming out of the continent. But obviously now there's the additional, I would say, challenge of COVID-19. So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs thinking about either starting up or scaling up during this time?
Yeah, I think a crisis. The Chinese word for crisis, I think, is the same word as opportunity, right? And so I think the COVID crisis has obviously given lots of opportunities. I think there's great times to start companies right about now. Markets are dislocated, so revenue and expenditure is going to go elsewhere. Certain businesses are going to thrive, like online vending, online conference software, for example, is going to replacing offline conference businesses in some extent. So you got to look at the trends. You got to look at what happens when you have human separation and digital interaction. What are the types of products that can sort of you carve a niche out in the space? It's a very big space. I mean, Zoom is a good example where Zoom is a monster, but that's just because they had a head start, right? I think the market's going to be very fragmented soon. They can't cater every single niche out there, and there's probably lots of small. They talk about the verticalization of Zoom. That's going to happen. There's going to be 10, 20, $50 billion companies that are much smaller than Zoom that come out and carve out niches for themselves in online video. But Zoom was there to suck up the air in the room because right place, right time when COVID hit. But so there's also opportunities to start businesses at all times. I think COVID's no different to any other time, except now, at least for the knowledge worker, it's all online and digital. I think the other thing I'm seeing, which is very reassuring, is that if you look at the valuations you're getting in Africa now, South Africa is a different example. It actually hasn't translated well across. I mean, there is some, but Nigerian and African startups are getting valuations, not too far off from the US counterparts in Silicon Valley for startups. So that's a good sign. And the valuations are more dollar based. South Africa is still struggling, but I think the rest of Africa is actually just marching forward, and investors are taking notice.
Absolutely. I mean, we've just seen the Paystack deal a few weeks ago. So, I mean, you mentioned some of the trends, like for example, conferencing software. What are some of the biggest trends in entrepreneurship that you see across the continent? And what do you think we can expect to see over the next few years? Where's this headed?
Yeah, so I think the biggest trends I'm seeing is that African entrepreneurs are, coming home from the US and where they study. I'm seeing a lot of like Harvard grads, Stanford grads, so people who grew up in Africa, went abroad to study, deciding to come home and build businesses there. And I'm seeing a lot of that, and I'm seeing them convince their friends to come from business school to go to Africa, and that's great. So I think one of the biggest trends is that you're sort of reversing the brain drain that happened over the 2000 to 2010 era where everyone just left, including myself. And for those people who are able to, return and start businesses, I'm seeing more of that happen, and I think it's a very positive sign.
That's great. You mentioned something earlier about how, we're starting to see sort of, dollar-based valuations for companies, for example, in Nigeria. And you mentioned that that's not really translating well in South Africa. Can you touch a little bit about that and just maybe tell us a little bit more about what you think is going on there?
Well, South Africa's got some major exchange control issues, right? So it's got, I would say, bad monetary policy in the country. It's got a massive budget deficit, and I don't think we have a very competent, leadership, across the board. I wouldn't say any particular area is good, but the economic models, the monetary policy models we're using are all very textbook, old school. Doesn't work in the new era. Very conservative fiscal leadership, which conservatism is fine if it's right, but if it's wrong, then conservatism is bad because you're basically forcing, the country into a tough spot. And I think foreign investors are looking into this and saying, well, how do we play in South Africa when we can't get money in easily and get it out easily, and IP is stuck there, and the Reserve Bank has this approach to things. It's the policies are wrong. Okay,
Mhm.
it's policies from pre-apartheid era policies that are kind of. It's one of those things, unfortunately, with South Africa, where you have a lot of pre-apartheid laws that were put in place that were never repealed,
Mm.
because no one has the sort of wherewithal to go and say, "Hey, does this make sense anymore? Let's repeal this law. Let's repeal this law." So you've got all these like highly protectionist laws which don't function well in a global economy, and unfortunately, no one's willing to stand up and say, "Okay, let's go through and do a review of the laws." And when they do, then there's always counter arguments on both sides. And then what happens in politics is if there's a counter argument, then nothing happens. And that's basically what's happened. And I've argued for a number of these laws to be changed and repealed, and nothing really happens, to be quite honest. And so the international community just basically looks at South Africa and says, well, and I've had conversations at the highest levels of government in South Africa about these laws, and it gets passed down to the people on the ground who not always the most competent. I'd say the senior leadership is reasonably competent, at least most of them. But unfortunately, they don't have the bandwidth to deal with minutia and micro details, and they hand it over to people lower down, and those people just can't get shit done.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And so, they're dealing with so many other crises right now that I don't think that they care about, what is good for startups and what's not.
And that's really unfortunate. That's really unfortunate. And so let's talk a little bit about Civic. And so can you share a bit about how the idea came, how this idea came about, and tell us a bit more about Civic.
So I would say Civic wasn't an idea as much as it was a philosophy, right?
Okay.
So the philosophy was that when we're building software for the future, and this is 5 years ago, like what are we worried about? And I think we're worried about tracking of human data and identity information. We're worried about privacy, and we're worried about how the world translates from physical identity documents to digital ones and maintaining privacy in that. So we've iterated on a number of different products and features in the Civic app, the wallet. We built an identity wallet. We built a cryptocurrency wallet. We've got different, we've got a lot of good patented technologies around, privacy enabling identity verification. And what's happened in the past 5 years, even through the U.S. voting sort of debacle that's happening now, and is that and you just look at the sort of social media bent, is that the big social media companies have gotten stronger and stronger over time, and
Mhm.
they're at a point where they're in control. They're in control of all your data. They're in control of everything, and the government can't even stop them if they tried. And so we've built some interesting technology which could counters that, but we struggle, I think, on some level to get adoption for this technology because there's no will to give privacy to people,
Mm.
right? Like we don't want, the government and the big companies don't want people to have privacy. They don't want people to hold their identity secret. They want to store it all in massive databases, and they promise it won't get hacked, but we've seen it get hacked many times, and your data gets out there, and that's privacy disabling. The current iteration of our product is effectively a Bitcoin wallet, which is non-custodial, and it has your identity information tied to it. So it's a great place to store Bitcoin out of the reaches of any custodial service, and you're in control of your Bitcoin, you control your identity information. But we are up against the big guys with this stuff because they're trying to do similar things, and they do it a little differently, and the privacy gets lost. And so we're a privacy focused company, and we're going to continue to just build these products, and we're hoping that at some point there's a wave of change that comes, which basically pushes it forces, like, the vision we have for the world is everyone should store their own data on their own devices,
Okay.
and it shouldn't be a centralized database where everyone's information is housed. And right now we've got places like Facebook where there's 2 billion people with the data in effectively one company, one entity, and you've got this across China and the rest of the world. And these big companies just get bigger and bigger. And so, look, the biggest like concern I would have is in 10 or 20 or 30 years, we move towards a one world government approach where all your information is sitting in two or three databases and the government knows everything about you. And it's kind of like I'm a big Philip K. Dick fan, who's a science fiction writer. And when I read those stories and I watch the movies, I just go, we're heading for that. There's no, like, I'm pretty bleak on the fact that in the next 30 years, there's probably going to be some sort of a one world government. And we're probably heading closer to this dystopian era. And it's just because people want, they don't want to fight for privacy as much, and governments don't want to protect privacy either. So, don't mean to scare everyone, but this is why I'm very positive, obviously, on things like Bitcoin
Mhm.
and digital privacy and digital identity, because I think that that's one of the ways to combat things.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that people don't want to fight for privacy. I mean, is this just a lack of will or a lack of understanding about the real implications this has in the future, for example?
Individually we care, as a species we don't. Does that make any sense? So, like, if I give you two flows to go through, and one is a quick sign up with, like, just put your email in, and whatever, and, like, hand over your information to Google or Facebook or whoever, and the other one is a lot more rigorous, where it's ID verification. You have to pull out your ID, you have to scan it, you have to verify who you are. You're going to take the easier path, right? And so, in the testing we've done, we've seen that people want speed and ease of use versus privacy. So if they make it really easy to, like, get in their system and start giving them data, that's going to win over a system that's more secure or private, because it's more steps and more friction.
Mhm.
And it's just human nature, right? Individually, you'd be like, oh, I don't want to give them all this stuff, but, like, for example, we have a system where you can store your personal information in your wallet, and then just give them the bits that they need, like, selective sharing. But that takes work to set up, right? So it takes extra effort. And when you're doing that, well, you'd rather be finishing your transaction to buy whatever goodies you want. And so the people don't want friction in transactions, and that's the issue.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, it's that is true. People definitely don't. They just want ease. We want to go for ease. I'm really mindful that you have a hard stop in in about a minute, so I would love to continue this conversation because I think there's so much more to dive into this topic. I think that the issue of privacy, I think, is very very interesting. But I'm just going to stop here and thank you so much. This was really short, but it was sweet. Thank you so much for your time. And hopefully we can connect a different time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All
Bye.
right, then. Take care. Bye bye.